Good morning, everybody. So we are reconvening the meeting that we adjourned at the end of the session yesterday. Now, I've got a couple of apologies to note for this session. I've got an apology for absence from Phil Major, and I've got an apology for early departure from Catherine Chu. So I'll move those two apologies. Can I have a seconder? Sarah Templeton. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. All right, so now let's move straight into this morning's heard submissions. And we've got Nick Clark from North Canterbury Federated Farmers joining us remotely. Nick, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Hope the technology is working well. And we look forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Nick Clark and I'm Policy Manager at Federated Farmers of New Zealand. I'm based in the Federation's Christchurch office. I'm making this submission on behalf of the North Canterbury province of Federated Farmers. The vast majority of Federated Farmers members within Christchurch City reside and farm in the former Banks Peninsula district. We'll be lodging the province's written submission in advance of the closing date on the 29th of June. But in the meantime, happy to make some points in anticipation. In April, we made a written submission to the Council's original consultation document released prior to COVID-19, and we stand by the points made in that submission, particularly the need to ensure the Council focuses on delivering its core functions efficiently and effectively in a challenging economic climate and seek to significantly reduce the proposed rates increase of 4.65%. Turning to the updated draft annual plan consultation document, I'll focus on addressing the key matters in which the Council has asked for feedback. With respect to the overall rates, average rates increase, it's good that the Council has managed to find around $23 million in savings and to borrow more so that the preferred option is a smaller rates increase of 3.5%. Thank you for listening. 3.5% is certainly better than the other two options proposed, but from a ratepayer perspective, we would prefer a lower increase. We note the Council looked at a zero increase and a 2.99% increase, but rejected them. While noting the comments about increasing debt and potentially reducing levels of service, we'd like to see those rejected options put back on the table. We believe a less than 3% increase could be achieved by increasing borrowing a bit more while remaining well within the extended debt to revenue ratio and by finding further savings in what is a very big budget, nearly $500 million operating expenditure, less finance costs and depreciation. Regarding levels of service, most of the economy is having to live in a new reality and focusing on their costs and doing things differently as a part of that. Local government and indeed central government shouldn't be exempt from this, and we support calls to improve the management of contracts and improve consent processes. We're unconvinced about claims that increasing spending by large amounts will do more for economic activity than allowing ratepayers to keep more of their own money to spend in the economy. Apart from spending on infrastructure, local government does not have the ability central government has to quickly stimulate the economy through its fiscal, taxation and monetary policy tools. Property rates are simply not suited to the task, and hiking them during a recession is, we believe, counterproductive. If it is considered useful for councils to increase their spending to stimulate the economy, the best way to proceed would be for central government to do more to funnel its funding through local government. And central government has a lot of money available, $50 billion in its COVID response package. The government's shovel-ready infrastructure program is potentially helpful, and the council, I'm sure, is working to ensure Christchurch gets a fair share of funding from it. On the other matters consulted upon, we support the council's proposal for an excess water use targeted rate. In fact, we'd go further and suggest the council should look to move over time to a volumetric water charging method for recovering all its water infrastructure costs. We also support the council's proposal to increase the use of weed killers containing glyphosate where appropriate, and we endorse the comments made in the consultation paper, but won't go in further because I know we're running out of time. Finally, with regard to strengthening communities fund, we strongly support the contribution to the city made by community organisations, including those in the rural areas like Banks Peninsula, but we're also concerned about rates impacts. On balance, we'd probably prefer the amount to remain unchanged, but if it is to be in a one-off increase, which we wouldn't be opposed to. That increase should indeed be one-off, and it should be funded through further cost savings found elsewhere in the council's budget or by borrowing a wee bit more. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. That's left time for a question, if there is one. Sarah?
Kia ora, thank you very much for coming in digitally there. Just a question on the desire for us to borrow more to be able to lower rates now. If we're borrowing more for what's effectively our operation expenditure, so the groceries, if you like, rather than the mortgage, we will have to pay that back, and so ratepayers will still have to pay that back with interest over the next few years. Is that something that you think is worthwhile doing?
Look, at the moment, with interest rates being as low as they are, and basically the unprecedented time we're in at the moment, I think it is reasonably prudent to do that and spread those repayments over time, over the next several years or so.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Aaron?
Just wondering if you'd had any feedback on the substantial increases in the residential rural rates. Yeah,
most of our concern is from the remote rural side of things. That's where most of our members are in Christchurch City. So we haven't had any sort of feedback on rural residential. We tend to get more feedback on the remote rural side of things, and we note that there's certainly the rates increase for remote rural is higher than the average, and I suspect that's probably also the same for those rural residential as well. And that's another reason why we're keen to keep the overall rates increase down as much as we can.
Thank you. Nick, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Great that we were able to use the technology to bring you in remotely. Yes. Thanks very much indeed for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Really
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
So I'd invite our next submitter to the table, Adele Garrett, and there's a written submission on the hub. Adele, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me be here today and have a few moments of your time. My name is Adele Jarrett. My husband and I are the owner-operators of Armageddon Expo. In general, events fit into many of Christchurch's identified community outcomes, including celebrating identity, valuing the voices of all cultures and ages, vibrant and thriving city centre and sustainable suburban centres. I want to encourage the City Council to support events of all kinds, not just mine, but all kinds of events returning to the city in as many different ways as possible with the annual plan. I've been in the events industry for 25 years, and for the last 13 years in Christchurch, we have had shows through the financial crisis in 2008 and through the earthquake years. We consistently held shows in Christchurch even though the earthquakes made it difficult. I've never seen anything as disruptive for events as COVID-19. The event sector is still struggling badly despite the fact we're now at level 1. Our events can only operate under level 1, and there is uncertainty in the market over changing back up the alert levels at short notice. There is not any event cancellation insurance that covers the event industry for COVID-19, nor is there any dedicated government packages beyond the wage subsidy or loans for events. Events have a positive economic impact on the city. Our Christchurch Expo in the past has brought people from New Zealand and Australia to Christchurch. When people are visiting Christchurch, they're spending money on accommodation, food, hospitality and other tourist activities while they're here for events. The events industry and tourism are strongly linked. All events share similar costs: venue, production costs, staffing, advertising, marketing. But the main challenges within the next 2 years for the event industry will be a lack of funding from sponsorships and from exhibitors. This will affect what events can spend and where they spend their budgets. And that has a flow-on impact on businesses within Christchurch as well. Christchurch needs to be an affordable and competitive place to host events. While money is always useful to events via event funding, so too is promotional support via advertising and marketing, so people know events are on. Flexible or reduced rates on venue hire can all make Christchurch more appealing to the events industry in general. Please consider supporting events in as many ways as possible within the annual plan at whatever rate rise you need to make sure that events can keep happening and that people can enjoy coming to Christchurch. And I've run out of time, sorry.
Thank you. Well, that was perfectly timed to cover the 3 minutes that was available. We might have time just for one question, if there is one. Tim.
Thank you. With regards to we've got Christchurch NZ and V-Base, which you'll both be connected with. How do you find them to work with compared to the rest of New Zealand? Because I see on your information, and I should remind my councillors, the fellow councillors, that these guys are Christchurch-based, but their events are national. So this is a very rare couple we've got here. So how do you find them?
In all honesty, I have had a lot more support from the Wellington City venue, from the Wellington City Council. Just recently, they announced a package that events could apply to for promotional support. Within 7 days, we had an agreement, and we're getting $20,000 for advertising support in 14 days.
Wow.
So this is a COVID...
compared to Christchurch?
Compared to Christchurch, there's no packages like that I've seen available at all. The only support we have had from Christchurch, I think through the tourism side of it, was up to $5,000 for accounting, basically, so we could get a cash flow budget done, so that we could apply for a business loan to help us through the tough times. And loans are great. Look, loans are fabulous, low interest, all well and good.
Not their loan.
But in reality, $20,000 to spend on advertising in Wellington means more people are going to go to that Wellington show, and not just from the Wellington region, but from further afield as well.
Which we saw in your documentation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
All right. Look, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for the submission this morning. That's good to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
So next I'd invite Lindsey Carswell to the table. Lindsey, thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
Good morning all. Last time I was here I gave you an economics lesson. Today I'm going to give you a bit of a one on accounting, one of the other subjects I taught for a number of years. And I want to comment on the cost that you've paid out on the Carnaby Cricket's oval in Hagley Park. I've spent quite a lot of time trying to delve into all of that, and most of it's actually buried deep in the accounts. And you can't just see what's actually really going on. But I would estimate that you've probably spent somewhere in the order of $35 million on that oval over the last 7 to 8 years. You spent almost $5 million building the actual embankment. You spent, I would imagine, suggest you spent probably nearly $5 million in operational costs, that's maintaining the grounds. But there's all the other little bits and pieces, the assets that you purchased, which are recorded but very difficult to find out about, sometimes slipped in after the consultation has ended, which is very naughty of you. But there's also, what did the Cricket World Cup cost in 2015? You paid for the marketing, you paid for the bidding fees to get the game here, you get the games here, you paid for the traffic management, the extra seating, all sorts of other bits and pieces which I'm not aware of, but certain staff will be. And the other thing I just want to mention to you is, don't try and tell me that it's just part of Hagley Park expenditure. It is not, it's at all. Carnaby Cricket moved into Hagley Park because and set up the Oval as a commercial venture. That's what it is. But why are the ratepayers paying for all of this? Why isn't Carnaby Cricket paying for it? It's their baby. Let them handle it. Why are the full costs hidden? Why do you hide things like this in the accounts, in the financial statements, and in your annual plans? And the really important point is, how can you as councillors, or ratepayers for that matter, all of us, how can we make decisions about what's really going on? You can't. When you bury stuff in the accounts and hide it from everybody, your accounts become meaningless. You must disclose as much as possible. That's the general rule of accounting, that you can never have enough disclosure. All right, that's what I want to say about the cricket oval and hiding of accounts. It's not only the cricket oval where this goes on. Years ago, when I was involved with a leaky home, the costs that the council paid out were also buried deep in the accounts. They actually overdid it, and part of the information they hid away, they actually were supposed to, by law, be showing.
Now, that's brought us, Lindsay, to the end of the 3 minutes allotted, so if I can just get you to wrap
the
up
last
reasonably
thing I
quickly.
just want to say is, of course, you need a proper complaints procedure. You're still to have one. What you have at the moment is broken. It's not working. That's my time. That's it then.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thanks for the submission. Thank you.
Let's see if you take any notice of me.
All right. So next I would invite to the table Ruth Targus and Penny Carnaby from the Littleton Information Centre. So thank you very much indeed, Ruth and Penny, for joining us this morning. Good to see you.
Kia ora everyone, ngā mihi nui o tēnei rā. I'm Penny Carnaby, I'm chair of the Littleton Harbour Information Centre, and on my right is Ruth Target, who is the manager of the centre. What I want to do today, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you. I want to tell you a little bit about the centre, just so you know what we're talking about, and then just make 3 points that are in our submission. The Littleton Harbour Information Centre, we withdrew our previous submission, which was a much more strategic submission as a result of the COVID-19. So this is a new submission to the second draft of the annual plan. Just briefly, the Information Centre, it's I don't know whether you know much about it, but it really does punch way above its weight. It's run by volunteers to the tune of about 44,000 in-kind dollars of work each year. There's a centre manager, a part-time paid manager, and it delivers information services to the all people who choose to visit wonderful Banks Peninsula and Littleton Harbour. And it also, quite importantly, offers information services to the community. We produce a fortnightly journal, the Littleton Harbour Review, and I think it's up to about 3,000. It goes up when we've got a crisis, so the circulation's about 3,000 at the moment, which and is always about 2,000. So that's every fortnight. So that's what we do. We deliver information services both to the community but to anyone that chooses to visit. Now, there are 3 things we really want you to consider in your planning. The first is at the moment the centre currently receives a grant of $10,000 towards operating costs, mainly the manager's part-time salary, and we're looking to increase that to $20,000 because it's really important. That role in Littleton and the Harbour Basin is a really crucial pivot to the community. It connects businesses, it connects the cruise ships and what's happening. The logistics, without this role, basically that whole $70 million investment in the new cruise ship thing, for example, what we're basically saying, we need to leverage that investment, and $10,000 on top of the grant we have at the moment seems very modest in terms of what you get. So we really want you to consider a modest increase, which would make a hell of a lot of difference to the whole community and how we engage with people who choose to visit us. And we're seeing a lot more Kiwis at the moment, which won't surprise you. The second thing we need to consider, and this won't, I'm sure car parking and loos will feature a lot on your considerations, but we currently lease the information centre leases the land adjacent to the loos are on the side of the council-owned information centre, and the loos are in a very bad state. They really need a big revamp, and you know, sometimes this is the point of arrival for certainly cruise ship visitors. Now I know that's not happening at the moment, but sure as hell the planning needs to go in, because we want to be ready. There's a huge amount of logistics, and just on market day we'll see queues there. They're actually not up to scratch. I think you'd be, you know, I'm not talking about a paint job here. They really need to be revamped. And the third thing I want to say is the Information Centre is really supportive of the Banks Peninsula Community Board's intention to scope a destination management plan for Banks Peninsula. It's a really important strategic framework for us. We have, you know, Banks Peninsula is so special. The walking, all of the things the Information Centre guides people to, but we need to be more strategic. We've got an opportunity to reset a sustainable destination management plan for the peninsula, and I'd really encourage you. So that's three things, and open to questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There might be time for just one question if somebody has got one. Leanne.
Thank you for your submission. I mean, it's always music to my ears to hear communities talk about what we can do better in partnership together. But the particular one in relation to the that last point that you made about the reset, that's actually a word that we've used for a paper that's coming to council on Thursday.
Right.
And specifically in relation to Akaroa. But is your submission that this needs to be broader across Banks Peninsula in terms of the visitor economy as well as
it is, and I think the community board's bang on the money, Leanne, because I'm looking at Lyttelton Harbour. It really is much broader picture, and you know, we have a stunning opportunity to rethink Banks Peninsula. I am a resident in two places in Pigeon Bay and Otanerito Bay, so it is the bigger picture of which Lyttelton Harbour Basin will benefit. But at the moment, it's not good practice to operate in your own little world. The council's got a huge opportunity, so I really would endorse that application from the community board.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Ruth, Penny, thank you very much indeed for coming along for your submission this morning. Thank you. Okay, so our next submitter is Jan Whitehead from the Banks Peninsula Community Sports Complex. Jan, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Apologies, I've got notes. It took me by surprise that this was happening so quickly. So just bear with me for the few minutes. In 2018, a group of interested people got together to look at the redevelopment of our community courts behind the Grand Hotel in Akaroa. The complex at the moment has 2 croquet lawns, 3 hard courts. These hard courts are in varying states of disrepair. There is also a club rooms building, of which half of that is tenanted at the moment. The group had, and still does since that time, some simple goals to redevelop the complex, to make it safe and multifunctional, to better fit the needs of the clubs and the greater Banks Peninsula community. To seek council's help with regards to a hands up with funding the project, and then seeking the rest of the funding required by applying to other sources and fundraising efforts from the clubs and the community. And the third one was to secure a lease to enable the Banks Peninsula Community Sports Complex Group to be able to seek that funding and so forth going forward. Nearly 2 years later, we're still working on that, and appreciate that we've had some time with council staff and with the community board working on that over this time. The sports group are keen and a motivated group across many sporting codes, and we are looking at being able to redevelop those courts so that they are multifunctional for multi-use and safe and usable. They were developed in 1932, so it's not something new that we're asking for consideration for. One court is now very unsafe and has been recognised as council as such. We cannot afford to lose more. One has, since the time it was developed, now been put into car parking. Why is it important to maintain these facilities? It's increasingly common that many adults do not get enough physical activity. Doing the required 30 minutes a day of moderate activity on most days of the week, we know is all a health risk if we're not doing that. Undertaking physical activity is a private choice, totally accept that as well. However, the conditions in which people work and play nowadays makes it more challenging, and we need to be able to provide those facilities, look after those facilities so that people can access that when they need to. You as local government are one of the most important and powerful influences on health and well-being of communities and populations. The decisions that you make, and I know there are numerous of them, this is just one area, may affect the determinants of health. As such, local governments have the ability to improve population health and reduce inequalities in New Zealand. Comes as no surprise to you that Christchurch City Council has a comprehensive physical recreation and sports strategy and many other policies. In these, you will find a strong vision and many goals and strategies to address sport and recreation facilities and activities in our region. Some of these: to maintain and redevelop existing facilities and open spaces to meet the current and future participation expectations and trends; to educate and encourage physical recreation and sports providers to create programs and activities that are safe, non-threatening, welcoming and beginner-friendly; to work with older people and physical recreation and sport providers to increase access to activities; to develop comprehensive one-stop shops for physical recreation and sport information; to educate and motivate children and to participate by making their early experiences in physical education and sport positive, successful, enjoyable and safe. There are many others. I'm preaching to you guys who've actually set these policies and procedures in place. One of the big ones is to encourage recreation organisations and groups to work together and share resources wherever possible. This group is endeavouring hugely to do this. There are also many societal trends that are affecting our ability to choose to be more physically active. Changes to work patterns make it difficult for families to organise leisure time together. For this reason alone, the open spaces need to be maintained so that they can have extended hours for these young families to come together. COVID, in all its horrific detail, has actually provided and reminded a lot of families of this, that getting out and getting that activity together in some of our facilities is the way to go. We need to provide our community, both young and old, with safe, affordable and fun physical activity options, and we need to provide low-cost recreation opportunities. Otherwise, many will opt out, as we already know. An example of this is I coach our little year 3 and 4s over in Akaroa. We have between 15 and 30 kids each year and have had dispensation from Selwyn Netball to actually run a little year 3 and 4 program over there. The reason for this is, yes, they could go and participate in the Selwyn Netball program, but it's on a weeknight, or there are 3 weeknights you can choose, a journey of at least an hour each way for our children, and 138 kilometres return trip. Many of these people do make it and make those choices in the weekends to play sport, both in Lincoln or here in Christchurch. But if you can see these little wee ones on the courts on Akaroa really enjoying it, getting those opportunities. The Bunks Peninsula Netball Club went from 5 teams to 12 in the last 3 or 4 years. And I would like to say it's probably as a result of running some of these programs that we can run in Akaroa and engage these people from a very, very early age.
Now that has brought us to the end of the 5 minutes set aside. We're actually a little bit beyond the end of the 5 minutes, so if you can just wrap up quickly.
Can I just say that we asked Council to consider an upgrade of facilities, and in particular the hard court nearest to the car park. It was assessed as barely serviceable in February 2019. That the Banks Peninsula Community Sport Group develop have developed a proposal, and that the Parks Committee have a look at that and work with the group, and that the implementation of not doing this development be considered by council, because it should be in the long-term and annual plans.
Thank you very much indeed for your submission this morning. Very clear. Thank you. All right, now do we have Dan Noonan here? So there's a written submission from Dan on the hub. So is Dan here?
Yes.
No. Okay. Annette and Michael Herbert. Yep. Great. Thank you. So Annette, thank you.
Yes, just me.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Michael and I have done a lot of submissions over the years. Some of you have probably seen our name on a few things, but we haven't spoken to them for quite a while. But we decided to this time, even though it's an annual plan, not a long-term plan, because we were kind of hopeful that with the crisis we're all going through, the pandemic, it would also focus all our minds on the other things that hang over us, you know, particularly climate disruption. So we decided that we'd come and speak to the plan today. Thank you. I'm going to speak briefly on most things. I'll start off, just our original submission still stands, and these are our responses to the updated draft annual plan. I should say I'm a citizen in Christchurch, live in Maryvale, and we both grew up here. We've been away and come back, and we do care about what happens here. The excess water use charge, rated charge, we're told we have the highest water use of all the cities in New Zealand, and clearly we need to value our water much more highly, so we support your proposed excess water use targeted rate, with the proviso that this proposal does not favour properties with higher GV, as is claimed in your explanation. We accept your explanation, hope that's correct. I'd like to speak a bit more at length on your return to using the weed killers containing glyphosate. We are strongly opposed to returning to using weed killers containing glyphosate where they have already been phased out. We understand the Parks Department had pretty much phased out its use, but the roading unit still uses it. We do not want to see these glyphosate-based weed killers used for any council work. Your plan explains that these weed killers are easier, more effective and cheaper methods of weed control, but at what price? The International Agency for Research on Cancer, funded by the World Health Organization. Its research is regarded as the benchmark for determining what agents may be cancer-causing. This agency has classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. A book on the subject of glyphosate, Whitewash, the Story of a Weed Killer and the Corruption of Science, by American investigative journalist Carrie Gillum, was published in 2017. It describes in reference detail how over decades Monsanto has corrupted science and the regulatory system, the EPA, the FDA, the USDPA, etc., and politicians in the USA to protect its billion-dollar profits. You are probably aware of the successful court cases in the US against Monsanto. In 2018, a jury ruled that the company was liable for a terminally ill man's cancer, awarding him $289 million in damages. That was later cut back to $78.5 million. The jury determined that Monsanto's Roundup weed killer caused his cancer, and that the corporation failed to warn him of the health hazards from exposure. German company Bayer took over Monsanto in 2018. It may well be wishing it hadn't. The company has faced rising numbers of claims that the weed killer Roundup causes cancer. Earlier this year, it was reported Bayer has reached verbal agreements to resolve a substantial portion of an estimated 125,000 US cancer lawsuits over the use of Roundup.
Now that has brought us to beyond the end of the 3 minutes, so
Okay.
if you just wanted to finish up
All right,
quickly.
yep, so we don't want you to bring in Roundup. We'd also like to see you face up to climate disruption. You have responsibilities under the Resource Management Act to consider the effects of climate change on existing frameworks, plans, projects and decision-making procedures. We don't see a lot of evidence of that. We'd like to see evidence of you running the climate change lens across existing all these procedures, and have you considered the lifespans of your big spend projects? Do they stack up? We should all know the answers to these questions. We favour an overall rates increase of 5.5%, and we support your boost to community funding. That's a no-brainer. We think you should have the higher rates increase because we're just facing too many challenges as a group. And I appreciate that you guys have got a lot of tough decisions, but we do depend on you. It's not going to be pretty if we don't face up to these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for the time taken to make the submission and for addressing some of the particular questions that we've put in the consultation document. Thank you. Okay, now just checking that we don't have Dan Noonan here. No. All right. So moving on then to Chris Abbott from Spokes Canterbury.
Hi there.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning. Well, thank you very much for the time. Do appreciate it. See, you've got a lot to do. I've got a written submission that I'll put through to the hub later today or tomorrow. So I'm going to pick the eyes out of it and try and stay to time and keep it short because you've got a lot to get through. I'm from Spokes. I've been with them for 4 years. I've been a cyclist for almost all my life, so way over 50 years. Spokes represents cycling in Christchurch. We've got a lot of active and even more passive members who we represent. We represent not only those that cycle, but those that want to cycle but feel unsafe to do so in current conditions. We're going through an extraordinary time, we all know that. Now, one of my abiding good memories of the lockdown was that the many pictures and articles in the local and the national press or the national media that showed people of all ages when the conditions were right, i.e. there were less cars on the road, there was less pressure on work, people got out cycling, and with a smile. Families, there is a demand for cycling, and I think we have a responsibility to make it easy and safe for all our citizens to do so. For too long, people have been forced into their cars because of the pressure of work or the feeling of unsafety around the facilities. So the major cycle routes are just tremendous. They're being used. Newsline this week showed that cycling use was up some 20% year on year from last year. That's the council's Newsline. But the revised draft annual plan cuts the active travel budget by, as far as I could work out, something like 77%, but only cuts roading projects by 14%. There's a mismatch here, a huge mismatch, particularly when in the looming recession, I can see that people will move more to active transport because it's cheaper and more convenient for short journeys than relying upon cars. People will not have the money for their extra cars. So I do see a move towards active transport. And we really do believe that the demand for cycling is there, and it's backed up by this recent experience that we've had and this future outlook of, I think all the pundits are picking that there is going to be quite a recession coming. Now, despite the success the council's had with the major cycle routes, it does seem that the program is being reduced most in the revised plans rather than just a fair share of the cutbacks. And yet the benefits for a small expenditure are so much greater than on the bigger projects. It's a case really of focus on what I think people want, and that is your decision, yeah. And we've got to ask ourselves, are we afraid of success? Every new cycleway shows an upturn in the number of people cycling, and it's appreciated that this is a good thing for everyone, including those that use cars for transport. More people in my submission, you'll see a picture of how much space is taken up by a handful of cars and the same number of people on bikes. As you can imagine, the space for cyclists is much, much, much less. It's just a quicker way to get round. It makes it best for everybody. Cutting to the chase, I'm going to stay hopefully within time. We're asking that the Cycle Advisory Panel be reinstated and consulted on all transport planning and projects. We'd be glad to take part, but it's just important that you consult all stakeholders, not just the businesses, not just the car industry, but all stakeholders, and that's detailed in the submission. And we ask that you empower all members of the community. Oh, no, I've just done that. But we particularly ask that you continue with the major cycle routes and the interconnections to the local routes that are used. You've started just so well. I say we've started so well because it's for all of Christchurch. I'd just like to see it continue, particularly in this time of economic downturn. So I'll summarise. Now, please don't waste this opportunity to complete the major cycle routes network as per the pre-COVID-19 plan for the benefit of all Christchurch citizens. Thank you for your time.
And perfectly on time as well. I will allow one question if there is one. There isn't? Oh, Yanni.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the submission. I just wanted, in terms of just a high-level comment on the design of our cycleways and whether you feel that the cycling community is engaged sufficiently in the design, or if that was kind of why you were thinking of this new advisory group being re-established.
Well, it's just that we've seen with many instances, say St Asaph Street, there was a ferry road, the businesses are consulted, the car groups are consulted, but the cyclists that are going through these, maybe not living just based right there, but the ones that go through are not consulted by Abbott.
All right, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We look forward to receiving the written submission. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
So next I would invite Brian Clark to the table. Is Brian here?
Brian's now unavailable.
Brian is now unavailable. So do we have Cameron Bradley here? Cameron, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Very briefly, I'll start by echoing the last three submissions I've heard. They're all really good. I'm part of Generation Zero. I'm also on the board of my local football club, so a lot of those resonate with me. Kind of not very specific, but just a really quick spiel on my kind of thoughts. We've all seen over the last few months that fast change forced upon us is obviously not nice. I'm not sure if you've read my submission, but the essence of it is looking at the way of life we live at the moment and how it is fundamentally unsustainable. You see our rates increases needing to go up and up. You see our waterways degrading. You see climate change being neglected. Those sorts of things. They're all costs that are going to happen eventually. It's just who's going to pay for them, and it's going to end up in my pocket and my kids' pocket at the moment. So I'm particularly asking to look at these long-term changes and put in systems in place that make these changes happen over time in a much more responsible manner. So making sure that happens to a lot of people and it's equitable across different locations, different industries, different demographics, sexes, ethnicities, and of course ages. Second point that I wanted to make is obviously rates are a massive focus for a lot of people here, and rightfully so. In my eyes, we're kind of put in this position because of neglect to make hard decisions in the past, and that's locked us into a car-dependent, sprawling lifestyle, if you like. The way that we live out in the suburbs, and we drive our car everywhere, and there's a whole bunch of costs that we don't pay for by doing that. So rates cover things like parking, infrastructure capacity and maintenance is 30-40% of your budget, public transport, parks, community facilities. These things, they all cost money, but they come out of rates rather than someone accounting for it when they go to get in their car to drive somewhere. There's also a bunch of other costs that we'll pay for as well, maybe not directly through you guys, but probably through taxes. Those are things like our noise, air, water pollution, the cost of crashes, with how many deaths, serious injuries, cost of congestion, so just being stuck in traffic, and the cost to our health of living these sedentary lifestyles. As I said before, Christchurch has been shaped by those before you who have failed to make hard decisions around making sure that we as the community live lifestyles that are sustainable and responsible for our kids. I know they're not popular to address, but if there was one thing I could ask for is that you look at the system that we're living in and consider, are there ways that we can start to make this slow, responsible change, which doesn't impact anyone as much as it will impact people in the future if we do. If I was to give you 2 points to start with, I would say look at the central city parking strategy and look at the development contributions policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for the submission. Thank you. All right, now we're a little bit ahead of time because we've had a couple of people that weren't able to join us. Do we have David Benson here? David, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the table.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I've rewritten my submission and given it to the gentleman outside, and it's going to be recirculated to you.
Thank you.
Domestic water should only be charged on the volume used, certainly not by the value of your house. Those in lower value houses do not get lower petrol prices or grocery prices. It's simple. You use the water, you pay. Perhaps the right-wing councillors should set up a private members bill and get it introduced into Parliament that domestic water supplies be only charged on volume used. Maintenance. Roads and footpaths and underground services, as you know, are poorly maintained. Response time in phoning in here to get something done is appalling. I'll give you two examples. Daresbury Park, just off Pendleton Road. Quite a large hole in the footpath in the park, 3 months to repair. The fence was broken, 6 months to repair. Numerous phone calls on each. The scouts had been allocated that job. They never got round to doing it. One of the other problems I see is people using leaf blowers, cleaning out their sections and blowing the leaves into the gutter, which will block up your drains and grates. The next one is Park Lane Village. The entranceway, there's been numerous phone calls, a letter from the management of a Vita company to the council, no response. Last week I invited Councillor Coker, thank you for coming along, much appreciated, and showed her what the problem was. It needs to be remedied. There's 49 new apartments coming on in the next few weeks. The rates will go up from about 130,000 to more than double. And in light of all the placards we've seen, we've got a new one, RLM, Ratepayers' Lives Matter. The convention, town hall, the convention centre, stadium and the metro centre, I would like this council to please tell the ratepayers what the annual costs to the citizens is going to be, because none of them will run at a profit. City Care and V-Base, their contracts should be openly tendered for. And why has V-Base got 60 containers outside in the back of Horncastle Arena? I got a funding suggestion for you to raise more funds. Red light cameras. You watch them. They'll ping through red lights at the drop of a hat, and you've got to sit and wait when your light goes green to make sure no one else is going through. Sponsorship. Only give sponsorship to those corporate bodies or whatever organisations who will actually generate a positive return on your money back to the council. I don't care if it generates $50 million for the town, it is not coming into your pocket. City Centre promotion. It's for the Businessmen's Association, the Chamber of Commerce. Council, keep out of it. It's nothing to do with you. The city logo. Garden City. Look at the trees. Dead branches, regrowth sprouting at the bottom, overhanging the footpaths and blocking that. And you're borrowing, it's out of control. And you've screwed city holdings, and thus not generating a profit for you too. Thank you for your time. I see my time's right up now. Thank you.
Thank you for the submission and the time that you've taken to present to us this morning.
Good.
Thank you. So next we've got Diamond Harbour Community Association and Richard Suggett. Now Richard, I can see you online there. Thanks for joining us remotely. We might just test that we've got the sound okay there. You're hearing us, can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. So, yep, we'd now invite you to make the submission. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Given the very limited time that you have and I have for the submission, I'll just focus on reiterating a number of key points. The first one is in relation to Diamond Harbour Wharf, and just say that we're very pleased that the council is leaving that in budget and progressing according to plan. That's to completely upgrade the wharf and put in a all-weather pontoon. The second point is that the multi-use potential for Godley House site, we'd encourage the council to continue its investigations to enable a licensed cafe to be established on the site. This may not entail very, very large amounts of council money. It's just a matter of working through the options once the council has figured out how part of the site can be used. Third point, the head-to-head walkway budget and funding and continuing the upgrade of the area between Charters Bay and Purau. The recent tragic accident on that walkway, where a local resident slipped off the walkway to their death, emphasises the need for that to be further improved. Another point, number 10 in our submission on Banks Peninsula pest control. We certainly support the council's contribution to the work that has been done for pest-free Banks Peninsula, and that the budget provision of 60,000 in this coming year would be appropriate, and would like to see that funding increase in future years. There is also has been some discussion of a Banks Peninsula destination management plan, and given the restructuring of the tourism industry and the need to look at how we can best use the resources on Banks Peninsula and facilities to encourage domestic tourism and what overseas tourism that might be re-established, preparation of a destination management plan would be valuable. There are a couple of other items there in terms of the wastewater supply upgrade, safety improvements on the guardrails, guys pass route, that's certainly supported. Footpath improvements, notice there's some at the moment, that's great. Now, getting to the big one of the rates increase, we support the council position to go for a 3.5% increase. It's between a rock and a hard place. We recognise where the council's at in that respect. We recognise that the community members are hurting in terms of rates, but recognise that the council needs to continue to provide facilities. And we do take the position that if any significant funding deferrals need to be made, that the multi-use arena could be deferred till sometime in the future. We support the targeted excess water rate charge, not necessarily exactly in that form, but we believe that once a basic allocation has been made according to the number of people in a household, and that allocation should be free apart from purely administrative servicing costs, then water should be charged for above that to encourage water conservation. Lastly, I'll just speak to the question of the glyphosate policy proposal change. We've had a further quite extensive discussion within the Community Association on that, and that now I'm fully appraised of what the 2016 policy has been. We actually would like to say that just continue with the current status quo of the 2016 policy, which allows its limited use in remote situations where there's really no other alternative for weed control than to use that. At that point, I will just stop and encourage any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for your submission. Just on the Godley house site, would the community, to get an outcome, be interested in selling the site to someone that would put a function centre there?
I suspect there would be strong community resistance to that, the sale, but the council could look at options for lengthy leases, for example.
Like a lengthy land lease, you mean? Not to build the building, someone else build it, but they can just lease the land for a long time?
Yeah.
Okay.
whatever is commercially acceptable and what the community would accept in terms of council land being used for some other purpose.
Great, thank you.
All right, Richard, thanks for the submission this morning. Thanks for joining us, and great that we were able to use the technology to bring you in remotely as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
So next we move to the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust and Mark Christensen. Mark, good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor, and good morning, councillors. The but for one issue on the submission, the Conservation Trust is seeking to retain the funding that is in the annual plan already. And we're in a time, obviously, of crisis nationally and locally. And so why are we wanting this money to continue that that's set out in the annual plan? Essentially, there's three reasons. The first reason is that I submit that the Christchurch needs a vision and we need hope. And we believe that the work that's going on the Banks Peninsula and on the Port Hills can provide some of this hope, can provide some of the legacy projects, and you as councillors can be part of providing a legacy for our children and our children's children. Secondly, there's a large body of evidence that that contact with a wide range of natural environments can provide multiple benefits, socially, economically, and health and well-being terms. So these are things around reductions in stress and anxiety, increasing positive mood, self-esteem and resilience, all these sort of things that we need in times of crisis. So we believe we've made a considerable head start in all of these things on the Banks Peninsula, and we'd really want to continue those things. Thirdly, that we will emerge from this COVID-19 crisis in due course, but our climate crisis, our climate change crisis and our biodiversity crises will continue. So those are the three reasons why I think essentially we're seeking for you to retain the funding that you have in the annual plan already for the work that we undertake. There's one additional matter that we'd seek, and that relates to a project which the council was part of, and that is the Pest Free Banks Peninsula initiative. So this is a multi-agency. There are 14 members. The council is one of a signed arrangement, and we've recently been asked by Predator Free 2050 Limited, the government agency, to submit a detailed proposal for the next 5 years to really rev this up with some additional money that the government has allocated to Predator Free 2050 just after this crisis. Essentially what we're doing is we've got a $10 million project over 5 years, and that's in its advanced stage of planning and financial analysis. We're essentially there. We've got $8 million in the bag. The government will match funding 1-to-1 for this, so we're over that 5-year period we're essentially short of a $2 million amount of money. So we're seeking from the council a $200,000 annual additional contribution towards that initiative, which would then be matched by the government. That would see us through the $10 million. And so the invitation really is to the council, if you'd wish to join us and the regional council and the other members in this legacy project, which can be, as I say, going towards resilience and well-being of the entire community. So that's the additional thing that I wanted to bring before you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mark? Pauline.
Thank you. So is Environment Canterbury already putting in, or are you suggesting that we partner with Environment Canterbury and share the $1 million contribution?
No, the Environment Canterbury is already contributing, so that the $8 million secured includes the Environment Canterbury's contribution mainly through a regional rating arrangement that they have. It's about $600,000 a year.
So are they contributing through the biodiversity fund as well?
Well, yes, they are, but it's also primarily through that regional rate, which was just raised last year for the first time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie.
Would any of the funding go towards predator-free, the Banks Peninsula? Oh, sorry, the Port Hills is what I'm meaning.
Yes, there's three priorities. The first is an extension of what we call the wild side from 13,500 hectares to 20,000. That's in the southeastern bays behind Akaroa and would include the Akaroa township. The second is the Kaitariti spit, which has some very interesting biodiversity, but also it's very defendable from a pest management perspective. The third priority is the Port Hills, and particularly the southern part of the Port Hills, south of Dyers Pass. So we have a project which we are working on, which haven't yet released publicly, which is called Te Kakahu Kahukura, and that is a project on the southern Port Hills between Dyers Pass and Gebby's Pass, right down to the harbour, including Quail Line, and down to the plains, to restore 1,000 hectares of podocarp, tōtara, maitai and kikatea forest, but to also have the 6,000 hectares of individual private properties contributing to that. Pest control is a major part of restoring that biodiversity, and so long answer to your question, but it's one of the priorities is to support landowners' pest control in that area with this part of this project.
Great.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much indeed for the submission this morning and for your answers to questions as well. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So next I invite Helen Broughton to the table. Helen, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that you're going through a difficult time as a council, and I just want to especially acknowledge Aaron, Jamie and Yanni, who were there for the earthquake problem. So I think it's much the same, perhaps even worse. I've tried to stay clear of major financial issues at council because I don't think council really wants to hear from ex-councillors. I think we aren't particularly valued, but what has angered me so much is that you're proposing to charge for water. So that's the reason I've come. And I couldn't actually believe you were doing this as a council. Now, the history of this, I was on council from 2001 to 2013, and every 3 years council staff did come to us in a briefing session and say, would you look at water charges? We had discussions, but when we looked at what's happening on the Canterbury Plains, what Christchurch takes is very, very minor. And I do have the figures here. Christchurch uses 53 million cubic metres, and the Canterbury Plains take 6,116 million cubic metres. So it's very, very small. The other reason, and so when the staff came to us, we always just said no, and it wouldn't even have reached the public arena. I understand the 2013 and 2016 council also rejected it, perhaps more on administrative grounds, and you've got huge admin issues in that if you have a row of 5 units, only one might be joined to the water supply. So how do you tackle that? And I think you're going to have the whole army of people trying to change and address that situation. I don't believe it's popular, but I don't think the public have had a real chance to have a say because it kind of slipped through. And when I rang at the very beginning to say, could I have a paper on this is about 3 weeks ago, I was told there wasn't a paper. So it's been very difficult. I've read what you've got in your draft annual plan, and it does set out some of the issues there, but I'm not sure how many people have read it. And I do think that residents groups and the broader public should be formally consulted. So I believe it's not appropriate for an annual plan. It needs to be done through the long-term plan. Annual plans, as far as I know it, are to make minor adjustments, and I don't think water charging was indicated or is a minor adjustment. It's a major departure from what council has done in the past. And I think with COVID, charging for water is not the time to do this. It will impact on some residents. I haven't looked carefully at who, but I presume large families, who could be our Polynesian families, blended families, families with grandparents in the house. So I don't think that the residents should be faced with water charging at this point. The other group it potentially cuts against is gardeners. So, but the risk all residents face is that if you do it this year, then next year it's indicated that you'll look at this again. So you'll get a small charge this year affecting some people. Next year you'll charge more people.
Now we are at the end of the 3 minutes. In fact, we're beyond the end of the 3 minutes. So if you can wrap up.
What I'm asking you to do is please do not do water charging this year. If you want to do it through the long-term plan.
Helen, thank you. Now I will allow one question.
So we've made it clear that it is just it is a step towards the bigger conversation that needs to be had. Do you support a situation that allows the top 20% of water users in the city to continue to the top 20% to continue to use 50% of the water that is distributed through our system?
To answer that properly, and you may have better figures than I have, I'd need to understand which groups it actually impacts. I haven't looked carefully at
just the
what
top
you're proposing.
20%. Just the top 20% of users.
Well, I'd need to know whether is this large Polynesian families, is it
No,
gardeners?
they're exempt. They're able to get an exemption.
Gardeners?
No, it is actually about gardeners, and it is about those that use more than their fair share, 20% using 50% of the water, more than their fair share of our drinking water. It is not an unsustainable it is not a sustainable supply option in anyone's book. But anyway, I'm now arguing with you instead of
and I still believe
for your submission.
Ought to be through the long-term plan.
Yeah, no,
where that's clear.
Your comments have been heard loud and clear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to make your submission this morning. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just suggest if anyone comes in and says that we are intending to charge for water, that you immediately correct that, because every time it's every time it's said, it seems to reinforce an incorrect message to the people of Christchurch.
Yep.
We're not charging for water. It's an
If you could just highlight the capital value allocation issue too.
That is an issue. No, that's not an issue. The issue is
Yeah, the point, Pauline, that you've raised is a good one. Yeah, thank you.
But it's a volumetric charge on top of a delivery, so it is technically a charge for water.
All right.
delivery.
All right, Tim, thank you for that. Let's just keep
Based
going.
on your capital
All
value,
right, so
not the actual amount of
next
water you
we've got Jan Cook, representing the Friends of Banks Peninsula. Jan, thank you for coming in this morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So I'm just going to speak to the main points of our submission. It was a reasonably substantial written submission. First of all, we asked for a focus on climate resilience. You will have, I'm sure, heard about this from lots of people. We've seen the response to the immediate emergency of COVID-19, and what this response has also highlighted some gaps in resilience and preparedness for such an event. And while it seems much more difficult to respond to climate change, with such urgency, it is an emergency much greater than COVID, requiring not only every effort to avoid emissions but also to prepare and adapt. And climate change is already showing itself in our area with severe water shortages in Akaroa and Devotional last summer. And frankly, the sight of convoys of army trucks tankering water from Christchurch to Devotional is disgraceful. What on earth is the carbon footprint of that? We think that Akaroa would be a good place to trial water charging. However, if the goal is to significantly reduce consumption by putting a cost on water, then perhaps the base allocation needs to be lower than what's being proposed. It does need some more thought, in my view. The issues of water supply and wastewater disposal are inextricably linked. Basically, what goes in has got to come out, and which brings me to item 3 of our submission, and that's the Akaroa and Devotional wastewater projects. And we've asked that you revisit these. When I became involved in this issue on behalf of the Friends of Banked Peninsula 30 years ago now, land disposal was being talked about then. There have been numerous working parties, consultations, etc. The council was about to undertake a 3rd round of consultation on its current proposals, and 35 million is currently budgeted for the Akaroa scheme, and recent costings start at 47 million for a harbour outfall and 57 to 69 million for land-based scheme, so up to double what's currently budgeted, and that's for 1,000 connections. Only the harbour costings include some provision for reuse of treated wastewater in Akaroa. The Inner Bay scheme, supported by staff, requires large areas of flat, currently productive land that sits in the heart of communities. It has become more and more complex and expensive as it is tweaked to try to make it fit. It's a bit like trying to put a pair of size 10 jeans on a size 14 butt. And it is high risk in that it is experimental, untried anywhere else in New Zealand, has little margin for error, is not resilient against future climate extremes, and does not address Akaroa's water shortage. A viable, safe solution for disposal of Akaroa's wastewater onto land remains elusive, and despite 30 years of considerations, we believe we're no closer to finding one. In addition, the carrot of purple pipe, that's non-potable reuse of treated wastewater in Akaroa, has been dangled before the community for several years, but we have now learnt that this has been in the absence of any national or legal framework that would allow this in New Zealand. So we urge the Council not to embark on another expensive round of public consultation, which frankly is simply going to get the same response as the previous ones. And we request that the Akaroa and Devotional projects are put on hold and are reviewed. Meanwhile, the work to reduce the infiltration of stormwater and groundwater into Akaroa's sewer system, and that currently makes up 70% of the volume of wastewater that must be treated. This reduction must be stepped up. If the volume can be reduced by, say, 50%, then perhaps a viable scheme for disposal can be found. Now, Akaroa is not alone. Of course, water supply and wastewater disposal are seemingly intractable problems for many councils. It's midwinter and Auckland still has critical water supply problems. There's an urgent need for a national framework, in our view, for both water supply and wastewater disposal, including reuse of both non-potable and, dare I say it, potable water, and we ask the Council to please initiate this discussion. I guess what we're really saying is this is a very expensive scheme, becoming more expensive, and perhaps it really is time to step back and especially in light of what's happening now, both with climate change and COVID, to have another look at what can be done.
Jan, thank you for the submission. Are there any questions? Sarah?
Thank you. Your stuff on climate change and the water supply issues that brings, would you like the city to be focusing more on mitigation so that it doesn't get much worse? To try and actually stop the weather being as bad and the droughts being as bad as they could get eventually, as well as the other stuff.
But I think the focus for us needs to go more on how do we build in resilience.
Yeah.
I think climate change is inevitable. I mean, it's happening now. Of course, we all have a responsibility to try and reduce our emissions, but also
need to be doing both.
Yes, I think, and I don't see the focus on looking at our resilience, and I don't see it with this wastewater project.
Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for taking the time to come in and present to us this morning. Thanks very much.
Okay.
And then we move to our final submitter before morning tea. I'd invite Robin McCarthy to the table. Robin, thank you for joining us this morning.
Deputy Mayor, fellow councillors, thanks for allowing me to speak to my submission this morning. Just a couple of things I'm going to run over briefly. I support the charging of water going into the future. I actually lived under two regimes in the UK, one in Norwich where they privatised the water out of the councils throughout the whole of the country, and Anglian Water provided my water services, separate bill. I then moved to Cambridge, brand new house, and within about 2 weeks I get a bill from a company called Cambridge Water Company, and I didn't even know that existed. They'd been in existence for about 129 years at that stage, providing very good water and also disposing of it, and the cost was very, very reasonable. And of course, if you're going to be charging for water, it is one of the best conservation measures that you can adopt. Now, when I went and made this submission, I didn't tick any particular box in terms of what the increase in the rate, overall rate should be. It defaulted back to 3.5%. I don't agree with that. It should be a 0%. I've taken the time to take on a hallowed cow, or probably something which no other submitter is going to talk about today, and this is the cost of running the people in the council. In my view, it's got out of control. We're seeing huge salaries being paid to many of the senior managers, and probably not to many of the senior managers either. Now, unfortunately, the chief executive, when she was appointed, said that there'd be no redundancies under her watch. I think that was wrong. She's now said, or publicly reported as saying, that the cost of redundancy will outweigh any advantage over making people redundant. Now, why? I've seen no figures presented for that. What are the redundancy provisions in the employment contracts that the people in the council have? Has any councillor ever seen an employment contract? Who's involved in the formulation of these employment contracts? I suspect that there'd be advocates on behalf of the employees. I've been involved in this a bit myself in the past because I have been a long-time employer. We should know this. Has anybody, can I ask now, has anybody seen an employment contract?
This is your opportunity to present to us rather than for you to be asking us questions.
That you, sir, as the chairman of this hearing today, should be asking these of your councillors. Because unless we know, well, how can the redundancy costs outweigh the benefit of making people redundant? Tell me. It's just bizarre. You know, how can anyone ever understand that? So I think that is something that you all should be looking at. You should all be, you are the governors of this council. You should be telling the chief executive to disclose these contracts so you can make an assessment on whether they are fair or not. A big problem we've got now, if you do make people redundant, no doubt that if it went to the employment court, then they would take up on this fact that, you know, no one's ever going to be made redundant and they'll take you, run you around forever and a day. So these are real issues, folks, because the cost of running this council is huge. And every year the number of employees goes up and the amount of the remuneration seems to be out of control. Someone's got to get control. You are the governors. Anyway, I'll move on to another one, folks.
All right, well, that has actually brought us to beyond the end of the 3 minutes allotted.
Gosh, it's only getting started. But anyway, there you have it. So you can read the rest of it, and I'd just like to leave a leaflet for everybody to read. It's about prioritisation of spending in the council.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you. So that brings us to morning tea.
Just on the issue raised yesterday of when an issue's raised or a claim's made, because this is a public meeting, if those redundancies could be explained in an easy, clear document open to the public and to us members, I think that would be reasonable.
Yeah, we've got people making notes on all of these submissions, right. And where there are matters that, you know, is felt that Dawn needs to respond, or there's a need to get back to somebody, or there are questions that have been asked, obviously all of that's been passed through to the right area.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. All right, so now let's adjourn for morning tea, and we'll be back at 11:20 and back on schedule at that time. So my intention would be to start again at bang on 11:20 so that we can keep to schedule. So I'll adjourn till 11:20. Take their seats, ready to start, please.
You go for a jog, James?
No.
Yeah, I think. Oh, right. Nice.
All right, thank you very much. So I will invite our next submitter to the table. So Dot Lovell-Smith. Dot, thank you for joining us. Good to have you with us. That's it?
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
Kia ora, everyone. My name's Dot Lovell-Smith, and I live in Hay, near Hornby, a place that most people seem to forget exists. And I'm here to talk about water and the water rates plan. I don't approve of it at all. There's two main reasons I don't approve of it. One is to do with equity, and one is to do with climate change. I can't understand why they want to give allowances based on the rateable value of a property, because it makes no sense, basically, unless the people who have flash houses and flash suburbs want to hose down their patios more than the people who live in more scruffy suburbs. It's really unequal. I also think that the whole idea of water, the water as its plan and use as it's put in this little booklet, is quite confusing, because it sort of implies that people who use a lot of water are wasting it, and that's a problem. But it doesn't take into account, it doesn't mention the fact that there's no water shortage, but what is at issue is the supply of the water, and that puts pressure on the City Council. And I think that sort of point needs to be made more clear in all the discussions about water that the Council has. The other point I'd like to make as well, I'm a very keen gardener. I've got a 1/4 acre section, and if you know Hay, which probably most of you don't, it's built on very, very stony, shingly soil, basically. It's where the Waimakariri River ran out to Lake Ellesmere many millions of years ago. So I use an awful lot of water, and I've been concerned about this water ever since I started gardening there. And so I've put in place lots of things like, mulch. I spend money on pea straw to mulch it. I use virtually none of my green stuff goes off the property. It all goes into mulch under trees and shrubs. And I've turned a bare empty section into a place with fruit trees, vegetables, and lots of natives, tussocks and things to support the life of birds and insects. I was curious about how much water I used, so I rang up the water people here the other day and asked them, and yes, I use a lot of water. I would come close to being penalised for this by being charged for water. And I just think that this is not in the sort of, well, it's not in the principles of equity and climate change that I think the council should espouse. I feel it's very essential that I keep the trees and the shrubs on my section growing. So in this last 8 months, when we've had virtually no rain, I have in fact watered them. I don't water my lawn. My lawn is a desert. I very rarely water my flower beds, and over the years I've lived there, my flower beds have shrunk smaller and smaller, and I've concentrated on the plants that can just live through a drought.
So that brings us to the end of the 3 minutes set aside for your submission, unfortunately.
Can I keep going? No.
No, and your point is well made, and it's a point that others have picked up on as well. So we've raised this as a question in the consultation document. We're aware of the different views that have been expressed, and your submission certainly adds to that.
Can I just add one little thing? I mean, I do think that the difference in soil types in Christchurch should be recognised. That, somebody could have a garden my size in Papanui and not use much water, whereas you know, for me to keep my vegetables growing, I need a lot.
I've got a
because
quick
of the
question.
soil
All right.
type.
We
I've got a
don't
quick
have time.
question,
We don't have time for a
Doc.
question, unfortunately. All right.
What Hey Hey stands for?
Yes,
Good.
thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It stands for chicken. Māori word for chicken.
Okay.
There's a poultry farm out there, B&D.
So we learn something every day.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I would now invite Chris Leach to the table. Is Chris here? Okay, so Chris isn't here. Graham Robertson. Graham, thank you for joining us. There's a written submission already been uploaded to the hub. Looking forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been involved with agrochemicals, is this going? Yep, all my life, and I'm here to talk about glyphosate. I've been involved with chemicals both as an arable farmer and as a member of the former Pesticides Board, which registered agrochemicals. I've also been involved in scientific bodies. Glyphosate was developed in the 70s. It was a new generation of weed killer, unlike some of the older ones, which came out of the German chemistry of nerve gases and horrible things. This new generation was designed to be absolutely specifically targeting plants and not humans. And I've used glyphosate. I've seen farmers all over the world. I get involved with some coffee growing farmers in the back blocks of Indonesia, and they use glyphosate quite cheerfully. It's excellent for urban areas. It's very safe. It breaks down and doesn't leave residues. But it has been mired in controversy since it was developed in the 1970s. And the reason it appears that it has been controversial is its association with Monsanto and the Monsanto GMO program to produce glyphosate-resistant crops so that you could then spray glyphosate across the crop and kill everything else. And this was something that antagonised those who are opposed to GMOs. But due to all the pressure on glyphosate, it has probably been tested more often and more thoroughly than any other pesticide on the planet. There's only one, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which found a possible link. And they found this possible link by dosing rats and mice with very high rates of glyphosate active ingredient. And at that dosage, then even common salt would have been described as a possible carcinogenic. Various other international agencies have looked at it and found it to be quite safe. The US Environmental Protection Agency, the European Food Safety Agency, they've both cleared it. The World Health Organization declares that it has no cancer risk and no effect on human genes. But despite all of that, some people, it is of their right of course, choose to fear glyphosate. And others worry that those who are claiming it to be unsafe, they worry that these other people might have a point. For that reason, the Council may wish to consider a policy whereby those who are adamantly opposed to glyphosate should pay a little bit extra so that their part of the street or their immediate environment is not, they don't use glyphosate. The rest of us, it is an unfair burden to not use the cheapest and environmentally very safe product of glyphosate. So I'm totally supportive of bringing back glyphosate and saving, what, 3.5 million.
Thank you. So that filled the 3 minutes perfectly, but thanks very much indeed for coming along to address one of the specific questions that we put out in the consultation document.
All right.
Thank you.
And I agree with the previous speaker about water too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your time. It's good to see some excellent community networking happening in the public area there. That's great. Okay, now Jeff Barnes. Is Jeff here? Jeff.
Certainly is.
Welcome to the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm opposed to water billing for the same reasons that it was withdrawn by the City Council back in 1990 or thereabouts. Firstly, water meters are not accurate for billing. Easy statement, but the facts are there. They should be replaced between 5 and 10 years. Auckland Water Care recommend 15 years. Some of the meters in Christchurch are well over 40 years old. They are not accurate for billing, for rate billing in particular. The cost to replace meters, if you work it out on a cyclic basis, there is tens of millions of dollars to replace the meters to bring them up to standard sufficient to justify invoicing. Secondly, the changes to the rating policy should be introduced as part of a long-term plan, not introduced as a modification. The wording in the long-term plan was vague. To do it now, it's going to affect potentially 120,000 ratepayers. It should be part of a long-term plan process and all options considered. The excess charge, if you do proceed with it, should be the marginal cost of supply, not the average cost. Your infrastructural costs, which are fixed, whether there's a cubic metre of water flowing through the pipes or not, they are recovered by the targeted rate for water. The marginal cost of supply of pumping an extra cubic metre of water, I put a figure on 10 cents a cubic metre, is the electricity costs. That should be the basic, not $1.05, about 10 cents a cubic metre, if you're going to do it according to proper accounting principles. Your staff member, you're the management of the system, in her publicity notes talk about and reducing the council's pumping costs. The pumping costs are not $1, they are far less than that. You've got to do the right thing. The charge is inequitable. Many properties in the city do not have a separate meter, ownership flats, unit title, blocks of flats. You cannot charge those by metered consumption. What do you charge? The first unit? The corporate body? All of those are illegal bases of charging. So you're excluding probably 25% of the residential sector from this charging regime, if you're doing it fairly. It is a rate. It's not an invoice for goods sold under Sale of Goods Act. The costs of billing are high, talking possibly up $400,000. I did the figures. I worked for the council. This was my territory years ago. The figures, when you took into account invoicing, extra metering, substantiating the bill, dealing with the complaints which will come through to you as councillors for the small bills and that people will not understand. One of the files from a key ratepayer who was opposed to this was about probably 150 mil high of documentation. Are you going to put a property up for a rating sale on the basis of a charge regime which is illegal, inequitable? The calculation is not clear in your rating resolution as contained in the annual plan. I know, I wrote many of those words that are in those rating resolutions. I know what they mean. It is a vague reference to, for instance, the 698 litres, 0.6 of a cubic metre versus the 0.9 of a cubic metre, which is talked about in your press release. Those figures are not in your draft annual plan. The words do not reflect it. Secondly, the concept of reflecting a per annum allowance is not reflected in there. It talks, the words that are in the draft annual plan rate resolution talk of a daily allowance. Now, I brought that in back in the early 90s for the commercial sector for some specific reasons.
Now, we have come to the end of the 3 minutes already, so if you just wanted to wrap up reasonably quickly.
The most important thing is that this is not the problem. The problem is about increasing the council's consent to extract water. 20 years ago, you had a 30% margin between that which was pumped out of the ground and your consent. Now you're probably down to less than 10%. What are you going to do when it hits that limit of 75 million cubic metres? Where are you going to go after that? Are you going to stop allowing subdivisions to occur? You've taken the money by way of development contributions to provide services to the community. But what's your fallback position? There are alternatives. You can pursue those alternatives. You do not have to choke what is in effect a major recreation pursuit for the city of Christchurch. You can pour millions into professional sport and the facilities they require, and yet you're penalising citizens who want to have a major part of their recreation and well-being in their gardening processes. You could just write to people who have excessive supply, ask them to reduce it. It's not difficult, just drop a letter in their letterbox and say, listen, we note you're exceeding a limit. Would you mind reducing? People will comply, generally. There'll be the odd standouts, but that's it.
So we've got your written submission. Thank you very much indeed for that, and thanks for coming speaking to it this morning. Thank you. So now moving to Michelle McWilliam, representing the Christchurch China Sister Cities Committee. Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for having me here, Chair. I take it that the document submitted has been read by the councillors in attendance. I am the chair for the sister city for Wuhan and Gansu, and I'm also speaking on behalf of the other sister city relationships that we have, being Adelaide, Gansu Province, Karachi in Japan, Seattle in USA, Songapar in Korea, and Wuhan City, which has sprung to notoriety. Christchurch is a very unique way of managing its sister city relationships. It is run by citizens volunteers who are actually highly skilled and very passionate about running the relationships. Some of the relationships have been going for over 35 years. And they play an integral part in the city. What they have done is actually established us on the international framework globally. Under a recent approved international relations policy, the City Council and International Relations team, the sister city chairs, are working collaboratively alongside citywide stakeholders with the international interests to be for most impact on our international activity. So basically, you have got volunteers standing side by side with your council doing work that is at a government to government and regional level. Under the framework, we are the first city to significantly have all stakeholders agreed that the focus should be on increasing the well-being through a prosperous economy. So we're going to leverage our sister city relationships. You'll see that in the document that was supplied, the amount of leverage that we have gained with Wuhan and Gansu. What it means is that the sister cities see value in allowing a great people-to-people connections and leveraging the economic values. The sister cities are participating in the same strategy and coordination meetings. That is with the airport company, Christchurch NZ, tertiary education, port company and any other quangos. We have two consulates in Christchurch, the Japanese one and the Chinese one. Because these consulates are here, those countries do prioritise to come to our city. We are the gateway to the South Island. There is a new buzzword. It's called a bubble, post-COVID. If you look at where our sister cities are, we are Adelaide. That is in our bubble. Our Asian relationships, that will be our next bubble. So that is China, that is Japan, and that is Korea. We have a soft entrance in there already. The groundwork has been laid. So when we do these things around sister city relationships, we take the long-term view. I'd also like to point out that Belt and Road is a key initiative that countries are buying into. Wuhan is called the hub of the Belt and Road. Gansu is the gateway. So what New Zealand could do, or Christchurch could do, our exporters from the South Island using China Southern, flying out of Christchurch International Airport that we own 75% of, or the council does, flies into Guangzhou, rails it to Wuhan, up to Gansu, and our freight can then go through from Gansu right through to Frankfurt. I have sat with the Mayor of Frankfurt and we have talked about these initiatives of the interlinking. We are also part of the Maritime Silk Route, which is another Belt and Road initiative. Belt and Road is not infrastructure, It is actually trade and people to people and using those kind of leverages. So as a council, the sister city work that has been completed for the last 40 odd years by a team of volunteers who have passed the baton on has actually set the city post-COVID in a very unique situation. We're ahead of Dunedin, who have a relationship with Shanghai. They don't have an international airport that takes direct flights in. So when you're considering our budget for the sister cities, I ask you to think that of the long-term value that these volunteers provide, the work that goes on behind the scenes, and they open doors. So when the mayor or a approved councillor flies into these cities, it's not a knee-jerk reaction. Those guys are going up there to reinforce the work. Asian countries are very trust-related, and trust is built up over time. Our sister city relationships have built that relationship. We can open doors using the sister city relationship for the economic recovery post-COVID. Any questions?
Thank you. So we haven't unfortunately left time for questions, but thank you for the submission. Thank you for the work that you and others have done over time, and certainly the point you've made is well understood. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next, I'd invite Murray Wigg to the table. Murray, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Just flexing the muscles. Having read the plan, I really have to congratulate councillors on their willingness to get on with doing this very difficult task. But I'm sure that their deliberations will be well. You can now start the clock. Historically, rate increases, wage rates or other activities are revolved around the national cost of the living index, with individual community variations on their ability to pay not really measured or accounted for. The COVID aftermath will see an end to all that. I don't believe it to be my role to go through the plan line by line and offer my opinion. Rather, I see this as an opportunity to provide comments that might add to the councillors' thought processes. The plan does not appear to have included, or at least not made public, the following points that I think councillors should include in their deliberations. Meaningful demographics such as the higher proportion of single-person households in Christchurch. Staff policies on redundancy, leave entitlements and bonuses. Description of staff demographics and movements such as retirements, promotions, numbers, age ranges and genders. Guiding principles of operation on the way the community wants the council to behave and how the council feel it is best able to perform to those expectations. Performance criteria for employees, departments and operations. Communications criteria and policies that include no secrets or surprises. Social responsibility policies and targets. A higher emphasis on a zero increase or better. A full description of community effects of COVID-19. Balance sheets or valuations of the council's trading operations. I also offer the following specificities to demonstrate my thought process or suggested options taken from the annual plan. Paragraph 1.24. CapEx in all planned options remains at 518 million. From a cash point of view, what happens when this is reduced to, say, 400 million as per last year? Would a delay in the 114 million spend by only 1 year mean that there would be no need for any additional borrowings? 1.36, option 3. A 0% increase may be against government policy, but council does not report to the government. You report to the ratepayers. If government doesn't want councils to increase rates, they should provide the cash difference from general taxation. 1.39. On this occasion, it is my view that timing for decisions on rates should not be affected by the need to respond to the guidelines for reporting set by any government. After all, the government is aware that there is a pandemic. There are obviously many more suggestions that time does not permit me to introduce. I trust these few thoughts are not too repetitious on other submissions and that they provide some constructive views. I now take this opportunity to ask for a total rethink as to the basis of any decision and urge that more time be taken to arrive at a better than a zero rate increase for the 2021 year. Thank you for this opportunity. I wish you well in your deliberations.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to share your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, I'd invite Janice Haley, representing the Akaroa Cemeteries Group, to the table. Janice, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, all. Yes, my name is Janice Haley. I am connected with two of the active groups for Akaroa, being namely the Akaroa Cemeteries Working Group, which I am a very active volunteer in, and also the Comptaperi Dissenters Group. I'm married to a Lalive descendant from the Comptaperi, arriving in Akaroa in 1840, so I'm also here for my children and my grandchildren. We have very historic cemeteries in Akaroa, carry and cover a huge amount of heritage for our area. We have been dealing with council for a number of years over trying to progress things that we would like to see in our cemeteries. We have available land that can be developed for further burial sites, but from council's work over the years with us, we've been told that this land is not available for development. We now think that with this COVID situation, there's a golden opportunity for some land here in Akaroa. We would like to see this land actually developed for our descendants and for the community as well, as we've been told there's no room at the inn. We have been working together in partnership and with the guidance of the Parks group, the new group that has been stationed over our way in Akaroa. It's been a wonderful connection with them. We have working bees together, and we find that we are now progressing a lot of smaller things that need attention in our cemetery. We have community needs for the use of those cemeteries. A lot of our community members, although only 10 minutes from devotionals, do not consider that devotional is another option that they would want to consider when you have a beautiful cemetery and a beautiful setting, beautiful trees. If you're ever in Akaroa, go visit our cemeteries, you will see what I'm talking about. Just absolutely beautiful, and who wouldn't want to be laid to rest there? We have been trying to progress a memorial wall. The Comptaperi group have funding for this. They have been asking for some time to actually have this memorial wall erected at the entrance of the foot traffic into the Catholic cemetery on the Anuku Road access. This too has taken a lot of work, a lot of time, and still no progress. We also, over the years, I've been involved with the community board for 6 years, and in that process I also asked that we considered a memorial wall for Akaroa, a convenient way of being able to store ashes without having to have people's ashes kept in Christchurch, basically, and an easier way to save a lot of use of ground, but still having that facility available. We've sourced quite a bit of our own funding. Quite happy to spend our hours working in the cemetery to progress and beautify what we have. And basically it stems to 4 wishes that we would really like to have support with, and that we have some invasive trees in the cemetery that we would like removed. We have asked to do this, and we've been told that we can't just go ahead and do that, but again, support, working together with council and council staff would be amazing. We have earthquake damaged historic headstones that are in the cemetery there, and in 2010 funding was made or granted for restoration of headstones. we've been asking for some of that support since then, and still no light at the end of the tunnel. We would also like to think that we could help with the work side of putting these headstones, re-erecting the headstones in collaboration with guidance and staff again. And the same with the memorial inch gate. It's all good to go. We just need the permission, basically. We would just like to think that the council staff could actually also work with us on the availability of that land. Where to from here? Can it be used? It is cemetery zone. We just want to have the support from council to look after our cemetery and progress what Akaroa's community needs. Thank you.
Janice, thanks very much indeed for the submission and for setting out, what you're looking for very clearly in those 4 points at the end. I know there was some discussion between your chair, Linda, and myself and staff last week, and I've got every hope that that will pick up a number of the issues that you've raised. But thank you for raising them in this forum as well, so that we're all aware of what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next submitters, representing the South Brighton Tennis Club, Mark Condon and Ruben McNabb. So Mark and Ruben, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the table.
Good morning, everybody. We're made submissions before. The South Brighton Tennis Club is part of the South Brighton Domain, and being on the east, we got hit hard with the earthquakes. The land, as we appreciate, has moved, but the tennis club gets flooded on several occasions. We need, as I said at the last submission in this meeting, a hard edge along the estuary to give us protection. There's in fact, I think the last year we were given an undertaking that monies would be set aside for that. At present, we're running into a winter with the possibility of flooding again occurring. As an essential part of the whole of South Shore region, really, South Brighton, we would like to see a hard edge put along the estuary, do it once and do it right, and then it can be put aside for many decades. Ruben, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so our submission had about the work that was signed off from 2019, and so part of our asking is that the additional funding goes into that 2021 annual plan. Okay. Very quickly, a thank you around the whole RAFIDI process which the council helped us out with. So that's called ECSR, and we hope to have that up and running in August. So getting really close now to having what will be a remarkable facility for our side of town. We've never had anything that looks like that as far as getting an indoor space for athletes, or young people I should say. So that, congratulations to the council around helping us out with that process. And yesterday, SSRA were in talking to you guys around the uncertainty around the proposal of what we call South Shore. It's imperative as far as the tennis club's concerned that is looked at properly and decisions are made quickly, because it's been 8 long years of still not knowing what people are doing with their houses and property. And I know I said this last time I was here, as far as I'm aware, that we're the only suburb in Christchurch that loses its land every sou'wester. That estuary is still coming through, and we will flood again this winter, and I for one are sick of cleaning up after it. Action, not inaction, is required. Good with that, boss?
Yep. I just feel that what we're asking for is what we had. It was reinstating what we had prior to the earthquakes. And as a resident down there, I think we were one of the last suburbs to be categorised, and there was a quandary over whether we would go red or green or orange or whatever. And I feel that given that we were left to live there, and I was red zoned and chose to stay in the area, that we should be afforded the protection that we had prior to the earthquake. This is still earthquake work. It's not new work, special work, it's what we had. And that's what we're asking for to get back. Now, all you councillors here have got tremendous complex issues. I have the press every morning and read it and read all your problems. The great man, one of the greatest men that's ever walked this earth, Albert Einstein, said, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So think about that as you go through your day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now I've got Sarah signalling question.
Oh, sorry.
Fine.
Of course, Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. You've focused mainly on the hard edge, which was what people had installed along those properties along South Shore in the past.
Each individual had their own hard edge, if you like.
That's right, yeah. But the hard edge itself was quite low, so a hard edge doesn't prevent the flooding, it just prevents erosion. And so I'm just wondering why the focus is on the hard edge rather than the flood protection in a low bund.
Look, I haven't got time to go through the complexities of it, of the flooding and the why and the where. Very happy to go for a walk through you with it all. I've lived on the estuary all my life, on the McCormick's Bay side and on the South Shore side. So it's a complex issue and it's not simple. But whilst, yes, everybody did build their own retaining walls, they weren't engineered.
No.
And there's a variety of standards.
But you want us to focus on the flooding rather than erosion?
It's two separate things.
Yeah, they are.
So
It was just that they were both
houses doing their bit down South Shore, and there's the previous flood retaining system of the estuary edge in South Brighton, which is Gabion baskets, Reno mattresses, which still work fine in certain places, but other parts of it have collapsed.
Yeah.
Which has been proven to be earthquake related, not anything else. And
But again, that's erosion protection. Yeah.
We need that. That's why we flood. That's why we've lost lots and lots of land down there. They need to be restored.
According to the experts or the heights we've been given, the South Shore spit went like that. So the end where the Avon Heathcote Rivers exit is higher than it was, and the South Brighton Bridge area is lower than it. And I understand, whilst we've had many smaller earthquakes, it's still in that vicinity.
But simply putting a hard edge on the low land won't make a difference. It's the raising and putting some sort of slightly higher, but to get the land higher to stop the water coming in. That will make a difference.
And I don't want to bang on about this, but if you look over the other side of the estuary, from the Heathcote Bridge through to Sumner, all you'll see is a hard edge. I lived in behind the Corsa. There's a hard edge right through to Sumner.
And there's the road to the port.
In fact, it is the main channel of the Heathcote River. Beachville Road has driven steel piles to hold
and can I just say,
so all around the world you won't see anything but a hard edge where attainment is required.
All right, I'm going to need to bring this to a close, but thanks for coming in for what's turned into a conversation actually today, which is good, interesting.
And I'm happy to go over it with you anytime.
All right, thanks very much indeed for coming along to speak to us this morning. It's appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you. So now moving to our next submitter, Richard Peebles, representing the Peebles Group and Riverside Market. Richard, good to have you with us. Welcome to the table.
Morning or afternoon, actually. Now,
afternoon it is now.
I'm Richard Peebles. Thanks for the opportunity of talking. I hope you all survived the bubble and enjoyed your lockdown. Very impressive facial hair you got there, James, I've got to say. Despite my ruffled appearance, and I haven't had time for a haircut, but I'm actually quite old, and I've been through quite a few sort of recessions. I was working in real estate during the 87 share market crash, and obviously the GFC, and obviously the earthquakes, and now we've had the shooting, and now we've got the pandemic. And I don't want to be Chicken Little, but I am going to be. We're in the eye of the storm. You know, we've gone through the pandemic and we've done really well, but we've now got some incredible, difficult economic hard winds ahead. You know, we've had come out of the bubble. We had some pent up demand. People have gone out and they've spent some money, but we've actually now got economic Armageddon coming, and I don't think everyone appreciates just what is on the horizon. Now, initially, I thought after the lockdown that we were going to have a quick recovery. You know, we were the best looking person at the dance. We could have pick and choose our bubble partner, our overseas bubble partner, Australasia, Hong Kong, China. We could have pick and choose who we wanted. That opportunity is now effectively gone, I believe. So what I thought was going to be a deep and hard but relatively short economic downturn is going to be much longer. You know, we're going to have a tsunami of job losses. I don't think, you know, we're going to go from 4% to 15, 20, some the worst guesses are like 25%. You know, before the pandemic, we had 5 million visitors a year. 41 billion was spent in the tourism industry, 230,000 jobs. You know, that isn't going to recover anytime soon. I spend all my days and this morning meeting with tenants and negotiating rent reductions, end of leases. You know, that's all I'm doing at the moment. You know, I feel like I'm a hamster on the wheel. We're running like hell. We're getting nowhere. You know, when I got back out of the bubble, I went to my staff and I said, our goal is to keep all our tenants. You know, tenants, this is where it's all at. We've got to keep your tenants. You've got to look after them because they're going to be hard to get. So you're going to make sure you retain them, you do what it takes. Even if you let them in there and they pay no rent, you've got to keep your tenants. So that's to keep the businesses and keep the people employed. And the council's response is to increase rates. Now I know my good friend Duncan Webb suggested we should increase rates further. You know, I love Duncan, he's a great guy, but he must live in some sort of bubble. Who has the ability to pay? Who is going to have the ability to pay? You know, we have a rates differential, so the businesses carry a disproportionate level of the rates anyway, and because of the way it's all worked out, so the rates increase for commercial tenants is greater than residential. So the burden is further on businesses and they're hanging on by the skin of their teeth. Now, I'm not advocating a rates reduction. I think that's impossible. But what I am suggesting is that the council appears to have just rearranged the deck chairs. No one's gone back and looked at every contract, every supplier, and said, what is your post-COVID price? That should be 101. That is 101 for every business. And the fact is, we're doing this every day, and no one is, apart from the council, no one is turning us away and saying we won't renegotiate. In fact, the suppliers, the contractors, they're very, very grateful that we're going to continue to spend and give them work. So we're doing up some shops in the Guthrie at the moment, just to give you some idea. So we would polish concrete floors, $60 a square metre pre-COVID. It's $48 now. The electrician doing the lights, we were spending $8,000 on the spotlights in this average shop. He's doing it for $3,800. You know, we're achieving these, and these guys are happily doing it. We're not forcing them. We're just saying, what is your post-COVID price? And we're getting these cuts on everything. So what I'm talking about is the quality of the spend and getting more for less rather than just spend the money. Quality of the spend, more for less. That should be our mantra. The staff should be told back and send a letter to every supplier, from your guys doing your pot plants, to your coffee beans, to your biscuits, up to building the new stadium. What is your post-COVID price? I get rung every day by engineers, architects, electricians, plumbers asking for work. I can tell you it's never going to be cheaper to build that multi-use arena than now. You know, we are in the middle of the, you know, I think it's probably going to be the worst recession that we've ever had, and the bungles at the border that we've had recently is just going to make that worse. I mean, I was hopeful that would be our saviour, but it's not going to be. and we're in trouble. So we need to batten down the hatches, and I'm not suggesting we don't spend. I think we need to spend on the capital projects, but we need to be demanding more for less. So we should build all of the capital projects, but do it at a cheaper price and do it within the budget you've got. People do not have the ability to pay extra rates. So that's really my message, quality to spend and more for less. Now, if anyone ever wants to sit down with me, I can run you through what's happening with we have 200 tenants around the city, and I can give you a rundown, you know, just quickly. In one development of 10 tenants, we've got 2 that are paying full rent, 4 that are paying nothing, and the rest are paying a proportion. So we're somewhere between 60 and 70% down on income. And so, I'm not alone.
So thank you very much indeed for sharing that information with us, and you've painted a particular picture, and it's one that clearly we need to be aware of and we need to be listening to. So thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come along and do that this morning.
Thank you.
Or this afternoon, actually, as it now is. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ross and Marilyn Houliston. Ross, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
I'm here representing my wife as well. Yeah, I feel for these guys in South Brighton very much. But however, first let me congratulate the staff for the effort that's gone into the revised plan in such a short time frame. Now, I'm approaching this from a climate change point of view, and unfortunately many things do not add up. Don't get me wrong, I've spent many happy times around New Brighton Sumner over the years. I get the feeling maybe I'm wrong, but staff are not appearing to take climate change issues seriously. Just this week we've seen 38 degrees north of the Arctic Circle. That is serious. Nothing we do here in New Zealand is going to make an ounce of difference to climate change temperatures or sea level rise. India is creating new coalfields at a rate of 1 a week. And America as well as China is bad in their own way. 1 year ago, hopes were that temperatures rise would be held down to below 2 degrees. Reports now say in some quarters we can expect a 3.5 to 4.7 degree increase by 2050, with it decreasing to 3.5 in 2100. This could mean in the south, sea level rise will be approaching Prebbleton, and in the east, lapping on Manchester Street. Even at 2 degrees, large areas will be flooded with water reaching Marston's Road. New Brighton, Sumner, Woolston, Linwood would all be affected and underwater. The predictions are here, right here. Now, I'll put it to you, is it not time for staff to start planning for encroaching sea level into lower spending in the east, such as extending boardwalks and signage at Travis wetlands, etc.? Put the money into trying to relocate, build up the city in future. I believe it's more prudent to start looking at our boundaries with a view of expansion encouraging eastern residents to move inland before it's too late and too costly. It would be far too costly to even consider building dikes and pumping stations, and I would be amazed if ratepayers would even allow this. Even areas of our pet bottomless money pit, fondly known as the inner city, could be affected. It also appears Council has no plans for the Alpine Fault within the annual plan, AF8. If this fault goes off, we know that ground levels are going to go down again, and there will be substantial liquefaction. The shaking could be up to 4 minutes. I see no mention of donations of ratepayers' money to the Williams Corporation, for instance, or the helping hand money we hear of developers are going to developers to assist them. The ratepayers will never see a return on this money. In short, to put it to you, it's now time to take climate change serious and to add planning into any future plans. I don't want to see this come, but we both know the Arctic and Antarctic shelves are close to freefall. The sites I've used are sea level rise before the flood and the Alpine Fault. On the last is an excellent simulation by the University of Carnaby. Perhaps the only way that it would be to reach Akarara or Little River or anywhere around those bays could be using the Summit Road in future. That's how serious things are, and there's going to be massive costs to bring this into development. So I think we have to start now. Okay.
So Ross, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the 3 minutes available, but thank you very much indeed for the submission. Thank you.
I can leave these here if you...
Yeah, that would be great. If you leave them with staff and we can make sure they're distributed. Thank you. Thanks. So next, Ryan Reynolds, representing Gap Filler. Ryan, good morning. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to acknowledge my close colleagues, Kai from the Green Lab and Hugh from Life in Vacant Spaces, who are here for moral support. I want to start by saying we work for the city as a whole, as dictated by our trust deed. We do not work for the benefit of any particular neighbourhood or demographic or group of businesses or cause, and are committed, legally committed, to the holistic revitalisation of Christchurch in accordance with our charitable purposes. It's as true now as we face a long-term social and economic recovery from the pandemic as it was when we were first created following the September 2010 earthquake. Gap Filler is incredibly prolific, with 15 active projects and installations right now across 9 sites in the central city, and 2 major new projects to be delivered by the end of July, spread across an additional 7 sites. I've included in our submission a few paragraphs about what placemaking is, and what I think is a useful diagram from the founders of placemaking, the US advocacy group PPS. As a side note, we regularly participate in international placemaking forums alongside the likes of PPS and have been invited to give keynotes and workshops at PPS events on 3 continents. So we're very much leaders here in Christchurch in the global network developing the theory and practice of placemaking. This PPS diagram shows that placemaking is quite a broad field and a holistic approach that requires leadership from lots of different agencies and sectors. I don't have time to go into it all, but the blue quadrant around transportation will largely be led by Council and ECAN. The yellow quadrant around uses and activities requires participation from local businesses and business groups, agencies like Christchurch NZ, as well as those groups like Gap Filler, generating a diversity of free and inexpensive social activities. The red quadrant around street life, pride in place, diversity, and neighbourliness is where community groups, residents associations, and placemaking agencies like Gap Filler really take a lead. Our work touches on all these areas with a firm anchor in the red sociability quadrant as dictated by our trust deed and the objectives of our council grant funding agreement. Now, placemaking is catching on in Christchurch and across New Zealand, in part because of our work here over the past decade. Development agencies and councils around the country have placemaking teams. The NZTA and Kainga Ora have embraced it, and lots of new placemaking groups are popping up. This is all positive. Clearly, it also brings an opportunity and a requirement to develop a more strategic approach as a city. Exactly this, developing placemaking strategies for cities and major developments, has been a key part of Gap Filler's work outside of Christchurch for the past several years. We've just started a brand new piece of work this month in Invercargill, where we are on the design team leading a process with the roading manager, planning manager, parks manager, heritage manager, the neighbourhood retailers group, key central city developers, and a wide range of others to develop an overarching placemaking and activation strategy for the central city. This is what we do. We and our peers would relish the opportunity to play a similar strategic role here in Christchurch with a similar range of key stakeholders involved. We've been doing great work within quite serious constraints. With longer-term confirmed support and agency to lead a strategic planning process, we could do so very much more. In the longer term, we would like to work with Council to develop systems to enable more strategic placemaking outcomes. This might entail having just one governance body for our 3 organisations, having clearer and official relationships with lots of city agencies, not just one team within council, having multi-year funding agreements or service contracts in place of grants, and more. Working out the details will obviously take some time and care. So given all that, we implore you to continue the grant funding agreements for Gap Filler, Green Lab, and Life in Vacant Spaces for the coming financial year, and to include as one of the deliverables for this year's grant, or perhaps as a separate undertaking, to work closely with strategy and planning and other teams within Council, Christchurch NZ, CCBA, and others to lead the development of a placemaking strategy for Christchurch over the next 6 months to feed into the long-term plan. Between our 3 organisations, we have delivered and facilitated more than 500 projects for the City of Christchurch. We have a shelf full of local, national, and international awards, have a decade of experience and strong working relationships, and have established Christchurch as a global mecca for placemaking. please empower us to lead Christchurch's placemaking to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? It's probably time for one question if there was. Tim.
So what's the difference between you guys and, say, council planning teams?
Yeah, that's part of the reason, and given the CCBA submission and your question to Mike there, that's part of the reason why I included the PPS diagram as part of the submission, because the sort of work that the CCBA does, would be a small quadrant, a small portion of the yellow quadrant of that graph. Our work is very much anchored in sociability, and between us, we've already worked out a strategy where Gap Filler takes a different sort of approach to Green Lab. We're very much focused on the central city, have a more propositional and kind of quirky creative approach. Green Lab has been doing really deep community work with marginalised communities, mostly in the suburb. So between us, as best as we can, we've worked out strategic ways of getting the best bang for buck. But yeah, if we could work closely with multiple agencies across the city, I think we could develop a really strong placemaking strategy for the whole city.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for the submission, for taking the time to come along and speak with us this morning. Thanks to you and your partner organisations for the work that you've done, the work you're doing, and obviously the work that you're planning to do. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, next, David Miller, representing Banks Peninsula Pest Free. David, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to see you too. And kia ora, greetings everybody. It's a pleasure to be back with you all, and I sincerely hope none of you have been directly affected by COVID-19 in a health sense. Of course, we're all affected by it in an economic sense, and that's where the challenge comes, especially with a project like ours and our request for more funding. So I'm here as the program management chair for Pest Free Banks Peninsula, a consortium, as most of you I think know, of 14 plus community organisations and statutory and local government agencies. And our submission has detailed many of the benefits for the community that are coming from already, and we're planning to have come from our Pest Free Banks Peninsula project. Just want to talk about employment, because since I made the original submission, a few things have changed. So our current on-ground activities have been paused, of course, with the nationwide lockdown, and our program, however, is now designed to directly assist recovery through direct and indirect employment opportunities. Prior to the lockdown, recruitment and training had already been raised by Runanga representatives to increase and build employment opportunities and the connections between young Māori and the whenua. Those opportunities, of course, are more and more important now in our straitened times. In our current plan, we're expecting to have up to 14 full-time equivalents newly employed as we roll out the first phases of Pest Free Banks Peninsula. As I heard on the radio coming in this morning, somebody was saying people only come to see you when they want money, and surprise, surprise, that's why I'm here. We want the council, or we're asking the council for help in various ways. First, we want to ensure that the pest-free vision continues to be community-led, with the existing budget provision of $60,000 from the council, which we are deeply grateful for, plus the support of council rangers, and a big shout out to the head ranger Paul Devlin. Local groups are being established and supported, but although they have lots of willing volunteers, they need expertise, training, and organisation to make an impact at local level. So this $60,000 helps to make that happen. Secondly, we're seeking $40,000 for the goal of eradicating feral goats from the peninsula within 5 years. Past efforts have shown that this is a very achievable goal with a dramatic impact on biodiversity, the economy, and on carbon sequestration. The program is a genuinely collaborative effort, widespread community input and support from across the peninsula, and supported by agency staff. Last year's program removed over 300 goats from feral goats from Little Akaloa. This year we're on track to more than double that, targeting areas around Mount Evans and south of Little River prior to the pause because of lockdown. Excluding staff time, the cost of this year's goat program is $135,000 across all the partners. A substantial component of this funding has come from reserves built up for this purpose by Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust. Those funds are now exhausted, alas, so the $40,000 we seek from you will help the program continue and sits alongside similar contributions from DOC and ECAN. Our flagship project in pest-free Banks Peninsula is the eradication of possums and mustelids from the peninsula. This is the third area we're looking for financial support with. We'd intended to discuss it with the Council next year for funding through the long-term plan. Given the current crisis, we're asking that you bring this forward and make it part of the Council's COVID-19 response. So we've already secured over $600,000 from ECAN with additional funding over 3 years from the Department of Conservation's Community Fund. We're requesting $200,000 from Christchurch City Council specifically for this project. We're actively engaged with Predator Free 2050 as they discuss their COVID-19 response with the government. Their funding has typically been on a 2-for-1 basis, so for every $100,000 they provide $50,000. But more recently they've changed that to a 1-to-1 basis, which means that if we had council funding of $200,000, that would leverage another $200,000. So you have a really effective multiplier effect. So I've exceeded my time, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I just wanted to give you a background on why we're seeking the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, David, for the submission. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next, I'd call Kevin List to the table. Kevin, good morning. Thank you, or good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Kia ora, koutou katoa councillors. Look, I just wanted to spend my 2 minutes and 59 seconds on glyphosate. Now, I used to work in Wellington as an advisor on toxics for the Green Party for a number of MPs, Sue Kedgley, Catherine Delahunty and Stefan Browning. And so what I'd like to propose is that the council reject the call to increase the use of this weed killer and rather implement properly the policy that they signed off in 2016, which was to reduce glyphosate use. The main benefactors of Christchurch City Council's enlightened policy was their workers and the community's health. Now, just because COVID-19's come along, it seems that, you know, like middle management or whoever in the parks and recreation are keen to push their own barrow of increasing weed killer. And to me, it seems like COVID-19 should not be used as a means of retrograde progressive policy. New Zealand has a habit of being very lax when it comes to health and safety. When I'm talking about the toxic chemical plant cleaning up at Mapua, where the workers that were affected still haven't been paid, Pike River Mine and White Island volcano tours. So the point there is that the Christchurch City Council should be on the right side of history with this particular policy. And I just want to say a couple of things. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency has, in New Zealand, has said it's okay, but the World Health Organisation, which I think might be a rather august body, has said it's not okay. The other point is that New Zealand's leading professor of toxicology, a guy from Carnaby University, Ian Shaw, this is what he said. I think that the evidence that glyphosate is possibly a carcinogen in humans is robust. I favour categorising glyphosate as hazardous and reassessing its regulatory status in New Zealand. So this is actually a world-leading expert, and he's come out and said actually the EPA is rubbish. So, you know, there's a lot of different scientific opinions, but I, for one, would probably go with New Zealand's leading toxicologist, Professor Ian Shaw. Anyway, I don't really need to say much more. I think it's a retrograde policy. I did have one solution, because so many environmentalists turn up and they say, well, we spend this, that. You know, you could reorganise the middle management in the Parks and Recreation Department that are busy sitting in their offices and won't actually have to use this poison. Anyway, that's all. Cheers.
Thank you. I'll take one quick question from Pauline.
Thanks, Kevin. Are you able to help us at all with perhaps reducing the costs of the option of not using glyphosate? Because that's the issue that I don't understand really why it's
I gave well, one option is to reduce middle management. The other option is, look, the point is that council, you know, it's all about priorities, isn't it?
Mm.
Now, if council cares about, like, pointing itself out to the world as progressive and environmental, then you don't go back to using weed killer or excessively using weed killer. So you look at other options. So that's what councillors are there for. I mean, I note one thing in the recent draft plan is that the stadium, that everyone that wants zero rates and wants a stadium, they say, let's have zero rates, let's have capital projects. Well, there's one line about that.
Okay.
So, you know, it's about priorities. Cheers.
All right, thank you very much indeed for the submission. Thank you. Okay, so now moving to our last two submissions of this session. So Sue Sullivan from the Christchurch Tramway. Sue, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Kia ora. I'm Sue Sullivan. I'm the new CEO of Christchurch Attractions, of which the Christchurch Tramways forms part of our group. I'm a member of the Christchurch NZ Economic Forum, and I'm here to talk to you, or talk to our submission that we will resubmit around the tram extension, part of the High Street revitalisation. Our original submission will be resubmitted. We wrote it during COVID, and as you can all imagine, we were under constraints, be it Zoom and time. Some background on the heritage trams for those of you that don't know. We've been 25 years on the tracks this year. We've survived the earthquake, and we will survive COVID. We at the moment have 3 trams on the track. We reopened Queen's Birthday weekend to support the city and bringing the city to life. We've had great support from local businesses on all aspects of the business around the tracks that we run. Since then, we've had some great days, albeit weekends, and we've had some very, very quiet days. So what we've done is worked with the community, keeping it local. We've talked to our annual pass holders via our e-coms. So an adult for $69, a child for $29, or a family, 2 adults and 3 children for $149 can enjoy the tram and the gondola for 12 months of the year. A key aspect of what we do is supporting the local community. The extension, it's been part of the annual plan and discussed since 2008. It was part of the High Street revitalisation, the Cashel Street to St Asaph Street document that went to consultation in 2019. A significant amount of the work has already been done, and I have a handout that you may like to look at later on, which outlines tracks that have been laid. There's a small part of track work that has to be done, and of course there's overheads and points, points being the directional part of the tram track. We understand constraints. We work in significant constraints, as you do, financial constraints. We're here, or I'm here, to talk to the commitment we have to keeping this project alive. We're here to make sure it stays on the radar, that you see it, and that we see it to the end. We believe it adds to the existing service already supplied. So the extension itself, it works in the Salt District as the last piece of the puzzle. The extension will bring much needed custom to this part of the city. The part of the city where the stadium will be built, bound by Madras, Tuam, Cashel and Barbados. This area will be serviced by the new tram stop at Poplar Street. We envisage that pre-event hosting, prior to guests arriving at the stadium, will assist in avoiding traffic congestion. It's a big part of our forward planning how do we service that part of the city? The trams are a great way to dispersing people. It's a hop on, hop off day pass. It stops at 17 points around the city. It's a key way to move customers, both local, domestic, North Islanders and internationals, through Cathedral Square, the terraces, Cashel Mall, the Arts Centre, Botanic Gardens, the museum, and of course New Regent Street. The tramway is iconic. The heritage trams bring a feeling of normalcy to the city in times of hardship. We heard those comments on a regular basis after we brought the trams back to the tracks. It's a unique selling point for Christchurch and a very competitive tourism market, in particular at the moment. The tram images continue to appear on TV, print, online campaigns, social media, and the cover of your draft annual plan. The heritage trams are believed to be the only operating on major city streets in the Southern Hemisphere, and the restaurant tram is the only operating restaurant tram in a major city in the Southern Hemisphere. We, Christchurch Tramways, have strong partnerships with Tourism New Zealand, Christchurch NZ, Central City Business Association, and the Heritage Tramway Trust, whom you'll hear from afterwards. So, in closing, we're here to make sure this remains on your radar, that we get it across the line, and that we continue to deliver customers through all parts of the city to support the work that you are doing in bringing the city back to life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you for your presentation. I know you've focused a lot on the short term. Do you think as a city that we've sufficiently thought about the use of the tram in the medium to long term as being something that could be more than just the central city, e.g. going out into the eastern suburbs along Ferry Road or up to New Brighton?
So I joined in December, and of course 3 months in we're hit by COVID, and for the last 3 months I've been at home. But yes, long term I would like to think we see it greater than what it is, and providing some sort of service. It comes at a cost, and as a council we work in partnership with you. You're constrained, we're constrained, but it's a good discussion point, and I'd gladly come and talk to you individually.
So are you, is your organisation or company involved with the discussion around the future of public transport in Christchurch and Canterbury? Have you been approached? Or
I've not approached that. I've not been involved in anything, as I said, coming in December. Sure. Previous CE potentially, or previous managing director, but it's something I can pick up on.
Yeah, okay. I think it might be nice to think about that as part of the business cases that we're doing.
Yep, we've got people making notes from all of the submissions as we go, including on the questions. So, no, all good. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come along and talk to us this afternoon.
I'll leave some things for you.
Yeah, that would be good. They can be distributed. So if you just leave them with staff and we can have them distributed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then our final submitter for this session, Dave Hinman from the Tramway Historical Society. Dave, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dave Hinman. Some of you know me, for those who don't. I had 50 years in the City Council and previous councils prior to retirement last year, including more than 25 years involvement with planning, development, operation of City Tramway. My involvement continues now as an advisor to CTL, and I'm also a part-time tram driver, so I guess I'm from all aspects. I was also a leader and participant in central city planning, pre and post earthquakes, and for a time was seconded to the heritage team. I'm past chairman of the former Historic Places Trust Carnaby branch committee, and I live in and have restored a heritage listed house. From a THS perspective, Tramway Historical Society perspective, I've also had more than 50 years of active membership. I'm a life member, past president and currently secretary, and I represent them today. So our submission, and it really supports what's come through from Sue already. So it supports the tram extension, and as you've heard, and you'll see from the diagrams that are coming round and in our later written submission, it is already well down the track, so to speak. Now, it's not clear from my reading of this draft plan whether it will be significantly delayed by proposed budget cuts. If not, that's great, because in which case we urge the Council not to slash further. It does seem to meet the definition of a committed work under your capital program prioritisation categories in the draft plan, given the political commitment and funding which goes back to before the earthquake and reaffirmed as recently as last year's annual plan and then design sign-off in September 2019. I also wonder why it's described as a new service, where it shows under that category what appears to be a $995,000 cut in spending. We support CTL's views on the importance of completing this next stage of the extension to Central City economic recovery, and in particular, connecting the Salt District. Having the tram differentiates the Central City from the suburbs and the rest of New Zealand, and this will help its economic recovery and renewal, including surviving competition from the suburbs and encouraging more people to live here. We have previously requested that the tram extension proceed ahead of the other street improvements proposed for High Street. This would bring more immediate benefit at less cost, and the High Street works could be undertaken later, as was done in Oxford Terrace by Sarah and Otakaro. I would like to emphasise the City Tramway has always been a three-way partnership. The Council provided infrastructure, CTL was the operator, sourced and found by the Council, and HTT, the Heritage Tramways Trust, is its contracted tram supply and maintainer. The HTT is a trading arm of the Tramway Historical Society, which owns most of the trams. The HTT have a written submission, and that will show it is struggling to survive with reduction in rentals through no or limited operation, and that it needs the work from CTL for maintenance and also to assist in funding further trams which are or will be under restoration for future city tramway growth. We are concerned that less funding from other sources such as RATA, pub charities, lotteries, etc. is likely to be available to enable the work of both our volunteers and a small number of paid staff, and also paying for contracted out specialist work. Two other brief topics. Ferrymead Heritage Park. We also support the submission of the Ferrymead Trust concerning the impact of COVID and any potential reduction in funding in the park. The Ferrymead tramway operation is an essential element of our business model. This should be a time of more funding to enable the park to further develop and improve its image and to attract more visitors, both local, domestic and international, when they return. Pardon me. Finally, support for heritage. Finally, our submission supports the retention and indeed increase of funding for heritage. In the Central City, the Heritage Tramway complements our remaining built heritage, some of which still require support for post-earthquake repair. The new heritage strategy adopted by Council after wide consultation broadened the definition of heritage and the need for its protection, including moving heritage, which of course includes trams. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that leaves time for question, if there is a question. No? All right. Thank you very much indeed for the submission, and we'll look forward to receiving the documents that have been circulated. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this session of hearing submissions. So I now need to adjourn the meeting until 9:30 on Friday the 26th of June. So I'll now adjourn the meeting until 9:30 Friday morning. Thank you.